Hi, my name is Rob Evans, and I'm Mayor of Waterloo, candidate, and you're listening to E-Transfer Podcast.
E-Transfer Podcast.
Welcome to E-Transfer Podcast. I messed up. Okay. No, I'll keep going. I'm like, what do I say next?
Everything went blank, bro.
No, I'm good, yeah. Welcome to E-Transfer Podcast, the podcast that transfers knowledge through great conversation. I'm your host, Julius 101.
And I'm your co-host, Gang.
Sliding in today, you got Theo.
And we have a very special guest here today, guys. The candidate of the next mayor. Introduce yourself, please.
Rob Evans, Mayor of Waterloo, candidate.
Yes, sir. Who wants to start the questions off?
I think I can start off the question. So,
Okay,
honestly, it's great having you here. And we talked earlier, and I really appreciated the things that we were discussing before. I think my first question would be, and I was thinking about this when I was told that you were going to be on here. Mm-hmm. I always think about when different, either a president, a mayor, or someone of a certain position of those types of things, they always promise something that they will do for the city or the state or province that they're in. I just wanted to ask what you see now and how the housing market is just going really higher, and seeing what's going on in the city in the past couple of years with COVID and everything. What do you think is some of the things that you would like to bring and change in terms of you being elected as mayor, if that will happen?
So, great question. So I heard two things. You're saying that there's leaders who, when they run, they always have ideas that they want to implement. Mm-hmm. And we know that some are more successful in executing on those plans than others. Mm-hmm. And then you were also mentioning the housing crisis, the housing affordability crisis that we're facing right now. So I'll talk about the first question about setting goals and working to achieve them. Any leader has to set goals and work with others to accomplish those goals. Mm-hmm. So as mayor, I need to work with council, and we need to work well. So as part of that, I'm getting to know some of the candidates, all of the candidates that are willing to meet with me. So we're starting with that kind of base where we at least have this discussion. So this show is a great example of that. And so just getting to know people and breaking down the barriers to allow a conversation to flow. That's one of the things that we're starting with. So that when we implement the plan, we've been listening to city staff. We've been listening to our communities and neighbors and folks like you that we met just at the park across the street from our house. And what that means is the plan that we have, we're calling it the A plan, the Equity and Housing Plan. And it's to bring fairness to housing, because housing is a human right. And it's something that we need to change people's perspective on. And so to change perspective, you got to break down some barriers. And that's one of the things that we're going to do. We might not be perfect, but we're going to try to open the dialogue up. And then the second part of your question was about affordability in housing. There are very simple and specific ways that we can help with this issue. And they're different ways than what people are used to doing. So one example is Waterloo is a fast-growing area. I was born here. We were from here. And as part of that, we've seen about 5 or 6% growth, which is a lot annually. And in about 5-year increments, that's been typical. Recent 5 years, we've grown 16%. That's about a city the size of Stratford moved here to Waterloo in the last 5 years. Wow. So the answer to how to help the affordability situation with housing is innovation. We've got to look at things and do things a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, we've got to cut some red tape. We're going to break down some barriers, but we're going to do it in a collaborative way that Waterloo's famous for. So that's a great question. Thank you.
That's good to know. Thank you.
That was a great answer, yeah. So I would like to start off, like, can you tell us a little bit how you grew up?
Sure. Yeah. So I was born in Waterloo, and my mom was a teacher, my dad was a businessman. And we were a very active family. There's 4 kids in my family, and we were in sports and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and a whole bunch of other things. And growing up, it was always been made apparent to me that the world's a bigger place than just Waterloo. And so our family was very close. We moved to a small town when I was 11. It's called Godrich. It's on the lake. And it's a beautiful place to grow up. It's a great place to settle down and retire. But there's that middle part of life where you need a job. And there weren't that many places to work there. So when I came to Laurier here for university, I studied business and political science. And I was recruited before I graduated. I started working in the tech industry. And as part of that, I was able to travel the world. And it was super exciting. And I thought it was really interesting because most of my life was spent growing up in Waterloo. And it's a little microcosm of Canadiana that wasn't so multicultural. But through work and through different experiences, I was able to travel. And I took a year off university to clear my head because I hated what I was studying. And they told me, you can't study business anymore. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I love business. It makes sense to me. So I didn't like what I was studying. And I changed my look on life by taking a year off school and traveling. And then my work is mostly in tech and technology sales, helping build businesses globally. And that's what's brought me to this moment today, where my current career is to run to be mayor of Waterloo. Thanks, Julian.
That's best. Do you have any thoughts, questions?
Actually, I do have a question. So I didn't grow up in Waterloo. I didn't grow up in Canada. So I lived in different places. Like every 5 years, I've been in a different country. But there's something really distinct about the Canadian experience. Even though Canada promises a lot of opportunity, there's room for innovation. There are also extremely clear discriminatory divides when it comes to access to opportunities. And I have lived it myself. I have been in spaces and seen where just because a certain individual's name might be too hard to pronounce, they actually don't get called on a position. You know, I've walked into different tech spaces, and despite the city of Waterloo being touted as a multicultural place with so much diversity, you walk into some buildings and you don't see any diversity. And I'm wondering, is that not enough people are applying for jobs in these spaces? I mean, people talk a lot. People talk a big game about inclusivity, diversity, creating opportunities. But how real is that? You know, when it gets down to it, what are some of the basic measures that you as a mayoral candidate can take to ensure that the young boys, the young gals growing up in the city have access to the same opportunities, and by consequence are able to build up enough capacity and have meaningful lives?
Jeez, that's a great question, and it's probably the most meaningful question I've been asked in 6 weeks of being on the campaign trail. Theo, can I ask you, where did you grow up? You said you moved around about every 5 years. Where was
Ghana, England. Yeah.
Okay.
And I did do political studies for my undergrad. And I will be president of Ghana one day, just so you know.
Okay. This will be a good video for that.
God willing, yeah.
All right. So, brilliant question, and thank you. Since the start of this campaign, I've been asked about the speed limits in Waterloo in debates. We've had about 5 debates on CBC Radio, Rogers Television, numerous others, neighborhood associations. And the speed limit debate here, it's gone like this. Regionally, there are different jurisdictions. One form of government, one level of government does certain roads. Another level of government does roads in Waterloo. And then, of course, because we're the twin cities with Kitchener and Waterloo, or the tri-cities, including Cambridge, there's different mayors for each city. And that gets clumsy. But the amount of times I've been asked about lowering a speed limit. So experts at the city, there's 1,300 staff in City of Waterloo only. There's about 2,700 staff, working employees at the region. There's a lot of experts who work in transportation management. So the point I'm making is they're experts in their field. They know this. They made a recommendation to council. Said, look, there are some neighborhoods that maybe should be 40 because cars are going too fast on those roads, and it's a safety issue. Yeah. Council, pardon me, they overthought it, reduced neighborhood speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour citywide. And most of us agree it's a little absurd. What I'm talking about is overthinking the minutia of government, not trusting our good staff, deciding to weigh in on something like that, and you asked me a question about systemic racism. Thank you for asking that, because I'm sick of answering questions about Espino. You don't need a mayor to weigh in on that, especially when we're overthinking it. So we all have neighborhoods. We know people drive too fast on. Slow it down. Listen to neighborhood associations on that. So let's talk about the racism issue. I was at a debate at the university. One of the 4 candidates couldn't answer the question. They said because of their sex and the color of their skin. He couldn't have an opinion on the topic.
Really?
And I disagreed with it, and the audience, I didn't want to make the debate hostile. And it shouldn't need to be to talk about it, because it's not a debate, it's a discussion. And I'll sum it up like this. I don't need to be gay in order to advocate for gay people and their rights. I don't need to be a woman to support equality in the workplace. My grandmother faced sexism. She was denied to be the president of a local university because of her age. That's ageism. The point is, we're talking about treating people with respect as equals and being unafraid to do that. So you asked me a question about racism. I have a zero tolerance. I don't understand it. It's old-fashioned way of thinking. It's an old-fashioned way of acting. And the best thing that I can do is set tone. Set tone for council, for city as a leader of a business, amongst your friends. You'll know some of us are leaders. At work, at church, different community associations, leaders can set the tone. And if you set the right tone, people aren't afraid to talk about things that are difficult. So as a leader, with respect to things like this, the city and the region, there's a diversity, inclusion, and equity policy. When I'm mayor, I'm going to make sure we're following it. And I know that the people that I spend time with, and my colleagues in the workplace, they respect all people equally too. So should there be some people who disagree with that, well, they're going to find themselves in a difficult situation. But we can talk about it, and we can move through those difficulties. And if you're unafraid to talk about it, that's the first step. So that's my answer to the question.
I do have a follow-up statement on that.
Please.
So you can look at the demographic makeup of the city of Waterloo and understand that there are maybe 35% people of Middle Eastern descent, 35% people of Middle Eastern descent, or 10-20% people of Black, African, Caribbean descent. Now, is it possible for a mayor to spearhead local hiring policies that make it mandatory for companies to have hiring percentages commensurate to local population percentages? Because if we have a city with say 60% people of color and 40% Caucasian rooted people, then we should see that reflected in hiring policy. So basically have mandatory, like this is a suggestion, and that's what I've been thinking. There should be mandatory policy for hiring quotas to match local demographic quotas.
So that's an innovative way to look at solving the challenge. And we're not afraid to look at new ways of doing things. That's something that I'll bring to being mayor of Waterloo, but also what I've worked in my own business. We built a global company, hiring all types of talented people. We never once looked at the color of their skin or their sex or any other thing as a qualification. We looked at their abilities to fit the role. So there is something that we can do. Things like credentialing, okay? You come from a different country, and you might have already earned credentials, or you've got experience in a certain space, where folks locally, when they're hiring, they may or may not know that those credentials, how they align well with say, a North American standard or a Canadian standard. So that's something that we can advocate for to more rapidly accept international credentials for certain positions. And there's a lot of positions, and there's a lot of talent out there, and there's a talent shortage. So these are some things that we can absolutely implement and support as an advocacy. That's not just the mayor's voice. When council agrees, there's not only letter writing. People who know me know I'm unafraid to push boundaries sometimes that need to be pushed. So we can make sure that the credentialing associations, professional or similar, when they advocate for a particular sector or an industry, that they welcome international standards more easily and without the amount of time it's currently taking. So that's just one thing. Could you repeat your question more specifically?
My question was on practical measures that can be taken to close this divide. And one suggestion I just threw out in the air was to have, hiring quota policies.
Right.
And then you put up credentialing. And I think that's really valuable, being able to transpose internationally gained credentials. Because you know where you could find the most doctors in this city? Driving Ubers.
It's crazy.
So hiring quotas they're a challenge. And here's why. When I grew up, our city did not have the diversity we have today. But if there were hiring quotas set in the 80s and 90s, there'd be a lot of white folks getting jobs because that's who already lived here. So it's difficult to set a quota in advance before we know that folks are going to be coming here that are different than I am. However, there are ways of setting a policy that removes drawing a hard line, right? What country is somebody from? Or, what is a minority? I think that being inclusive, it's not specific, so some people don't like it. What does that mean? Or what is equity? It generally means fairness. So when we draw hard lines around quotas or things like that, not everybody embraces it as easily as a policy of fairness, because fairness is something we can agree on. And it's best measured by the person who feels it. I feel you guys are treating me fairly here by inviting me to do something like this. And I love that. The way that our children's generation looks at things is different than the way a lot of people that I grew up knowing and talking about. So an idea of fairness, I think, might be a better starting point than drawing hard lines, because when it becomes you and not me, or this color person and not this other color person, there's a lot of gray area in the color of people. There's a difference in between. And how are we going to be more specific than that? The best starting point that I know of is fairness.
Totally understood. I have one example. I had a conversation with a WRPS officer about a month ago, and I asked him how many black women officers were on the force. He scratched his head and told me he could only think about one.
Well, there's a lot of police, and we can probably do better than that. We can do better than that. That's a good point, though.
Yeah, that's so for me is I just want to know, like, if you were to get elected, what are some of the things that you want to change, or what is your goal as the mayor of Waterloo? And like, I know you advocate a lot on the students. How about the people who live in Waterloo who grew up here? Like, what are some of the things that you want to change and just do for the city?
Well, I'm not just doing this for the people who live here today. The reason I'm running for mayor is my son's generation. My son, it's how we met. And so when I look at who's here now, I'm also already planning for who's going to be moving here. And we need to set the tone. So as a leader of any community, and as leader or as a mayor, leader of council, we set tone. So some of what we need to do, and you mentioned students, breaking down barriers. There's a fact. There's rampant discrimination happening in the housing industry, and it trickles down through a lot of different parts of society. It's more than just the workplace. And when you're looking to get a place to live and sleep at night, it's got to be safe. It's got to be trusted. And of course, you have to be able to afford it. So there's a whole bunch of layers that kind of get into that. But the point of the equity and housing plan is when we can't be fair to people whose money is the same color as mine, and if folks look a little different than I do when they're applying for a place to sleep at night, and they get turned down because they can't spell somebody's name, or because they're afraid that somebody looks a little different than I do, that's wrong. There's no place for it, and it's disgusting. And there are better ways to do this in terms of managing it as city and as a mayor. There's some really cool parts of our plan that is a little bit different. And there's a neighborhood zone we're going to be drawing around the university. They do that. It's called secondary planning. It's it's a planning process where neighborhoods are defined and slightly different rules are applied within a certain context. So all that means is a key part of this is renter pre-approvals. We're just working backwards, folks. There's an empty room over here. This is what it costs. And as long as you provide the base level of things that they would rent to anyone, it doesn't matter how you spell my name. But I do need some ID because I'm going to rent a $400,000 condo to somebody. I'd like to have their ID on hand. So there's some reasonable things that we can set in advance so that owners aren't afraid of renting to anybody. And people can still get a fair place to sleep at night that's safe and trusted. So there's things that are tied to discrimination that we can remove from the process with simple things. And by cutting some of the red tape that's involved right now in approving where people sleep at night and owners accepting any tenant who meets their criteria, then owners can be happy and we can remove some of the steps in the way there, because the old-fashioned way was this. There'd be a stack of resumes and applications on somebody's desk. And what they would do is they'd look through the stack and they would try to guess who's going to be the best renter to fit that empty room. And to automate, use a little bit of technology and business process, we can remove discrimination from that, make it easier for owners to accept anyone from moving in. And the underlying problem that we've also identified is students are paying 25% more for the same quality of square footage as everybody else. So that's discrimination against students. And it's wrong, and it doesn't need to be happening. The good news is the equity and housing plan has some tools in there that are a little bit different, but they're fair to owners and they're fair to renters, and it can lower their annual cost of a student's accommodation by about 10 or 12%.
All right, so
Yeah, go for it, man.
So just going back to when you were talking about the students, and that's kind of the goals that you want to meet in this city. One of the things that we were discussing off camera was that my thing is when I'm looking now at career paths, and I'm looking at my life and how I grew up in the city. A lot of people now, I feel like now more than ever with the inflation and things, the cost of living and the cost of even foods rising up, do you think you will ever have like a different type of maybe awareness onto how the younger generation or even my generation should worry about how to deal with money? A lot of people from school, you don't get taught how to do taxes, which is not really the most important thing, but you don't get taught anything really about how to properly save money and use it in an appropriate manner for you to actually build onto it. Because I think I remember seeing this stat, which I said to you before, was that 1 out of 10 people in the US making $100K or more is living paycheck to paycheck, which it doesn't mean that if they don't get a paycheck that they don't have money to live with, but it just shows how not only is it that people don't know how to save money more than ever, even with the debt into student loans is becoming high because just the thought of getting money and then spending it right away and not saving it for a consistent like future. I think that's what I wanted to get into. I don't know if that was a little lengthy, but yeah.
That's okay. What I know, so education is important to my family. And I went to Laurier here. There's a lot of great schools in our city, and there's about a third of everyone who lives in Waterloo is a student. So we've got to start respecting and listening to folks like you, and you guys are graduates. So through COVID, something occurred to me, probably sooner even. Half of the benefit of going to university is the going part. All that means is you can get a textbook. You can go to a bookstore and get the same textbooks you would by going to university and sit at home and read them, study, and master the content. You can do that all on your own. The going to school part half of the learning happens outside of the classroom, and that's kind of like life.
Yeah.
So I studied, finance, business in school. By the time you're 18, you should have some handle of basic finance, but not every family spends time on educating their kids in that way. But there's different ways you can learn outside of the classroom. And so financial management is one thing. Starting a small business as a kid, that's something that I did. I won't bore you with the fish story, selling that at the end of my driveway, but the point is, well, maybe I should. Yeah, sure. So I go fishing at my cottage. I catch a perch. It's on Lake Huron. I catch a perch that was bigger than any perch any of my friends had ever seen. And instead of like thinking, hey, I want to eat this thing, my first thought was, hey, I could sell this and make some money. This fish is so amazing. So for $5, I thought I could get $5. I could go to the store and buy a ton of candy. I sat at the edge of my driveway in the sun with a box, and I put the fish on the box. Figured anyone walking by who likes a nice fish, they're gonna pay $5 for sure. Like an hour later, it's like, okay, this is an exercise in economics. Okay, supply and demand. Not a lot of people walking by. The fish have been out in the sun for an hour. So then I'm like, what's the problem is $5. That's just too much. So I made it $4. No, not enough people walking by. And then it was $3. And then eventually, someone who was doing some work nearby said, look, son, $3. I'll tell you what, I'll give you $2. And how about you just call it a day? You've been out there for like 4 hours. So anyways, that's my quick story of economics. But there's a million ways to learn about money, or about how to treat people, or about history, or about English. So I live with my partner, Jordana. She's got a PhD in education. So there's a million ways to learn in a classroom for those who do well in that stuff. But there's also a million ways to learn outside of the classroom. So with respect to any of those topics, including money, you can learn that outside of the classroom also. But it's good to pay attention along the way. I hope that answers your question.
I think mainly what I was thinking was that, do you think this should be voiced more, and maybe if someone maybe asks you the question down the line, if it's like in a public setting or whatever, do you think it should be more talked about when you're in a kind of setting like this where someone is speaking on, okay, like I've been going through struggles with money. What advice would you give if, let's say, someone was growing up, they're like 18, 20 years old, trying to figure out what should I do to like budget and all that?
So good question. So yes is the answer to that. There's a lot of ways that other people can help you learn, but also it's important to talk about that stuff too. So with my son, I help him as a family member, teaching him a little bit about money. My father did the same thing with me. And there's different organizations, community groups, and just others who can help teach those things to those types of people. I did a tech-based startup. And as part of that, we raised money from strangers and from friends and family to get this thing off the ground. And by the time you talk about things like money, by the time you're 18 or 20 or a little bit older than that, at any point, there's never a bad time to go deep and to share aspects of how to manage things better, how to learn, and then also how to ask for help. So Theo's got a great shirt on, and it's something that comes from Waterloo. The willingness to do things differently and risk a little bit to push boundaries and build something better, build something more efficiently, do something different, or do something great. And as part of that, when you put your trust in the people around you, and when people around you put their trust or their money in with you, it does elevate the level of accountability and the responsibility that comes with that trust. Right. And in a way, it's a terrible feeling to have that extra weight on your shoulders. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, and you believe in what you're doing, and you communicate effectively with your shareholders, or with your parents, or with your friends, when it comes down to something like money, it is important that you put some trust in the people around you, and you can learn from everybody in different ways.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. actually have a follow-up to that statement. So you put up a valuable point about mass movements to help young people with bad credit, finance, etc. Now, Rob, in your journey towards mayoral candidacy, are you open to collaborating with members of the community such that the gentlemen in this room can come together and say, hey, Rob, we want to do a civic education campaign that's going to do financial management lessons across the different across the different community centers. Like, is that kind of collaboration possible where the group or the interested parties might not necessarily be asking for financial resources, but they would be asking for some form of resource they can leverage, for example, letters of introduction, etc. Are you the type of mayor who has a door that's open to young people, visionaries, innovators who want to come knock on your door and say, look, we are tired of the way things have been. We need your support to make things happen. Can we count on you for that?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of accessibility of people and what department does what or whom should we speak to about doing anything in a financial management forum or something like that where you'd like to engage with community members, absolutely. So this community is famous for those kinds of connections. They call it barn raising, where the Mennonites locally, when somebody needs a barn built for their farm, they need to be built fairly quickly, and they need a lot of hands. And the more people that help makes lighter work. And as part of that barn raising mentality, David Johnson, Canada's former Governor General, he was the president of University of Waterloo, and among other things, he lived just out right in the middle of the countryside, just north of the city in Waterloo. And that barn raising mentality is what we're talking about here, where you go to one person, you say, oh, I'd like to do something like this, but I don't know how to get started. That's the innovation culture that's bred right from Waterloo. And it's something that extends well beyond just technology startups that I spent most of my career in. And it comes to, if you have a great idea, the mayor's office, there will be some changes. We're going to have an action team. And all that means is instead of a task force and a committee to go see if it's appropriate to make a simple connection, we're going to have a more open door. We're going to get things done a lot faster. So absolutely, our door will be open to make connections faster. We're going to break down some barriers. So we're not staring at only the silo over here or the silo there. We're going to look at the whole farm and the farm within a neighborhood so that we can make sure that any connection that makes sense, we can get those done much faster. Great question, Theo.
Yeah, very excited. So I know for me and Gong, like we grew up in Waterloo, right? And like half of the times, like a lot of the stuff that like we try to do, like we didn't have the same opportunities as youth. So like for me, like I know it's kind of hard for me to get into like activities like sports like that because of fees that we had to pay, and we were not like we didn't have the same access to things because of the how much it costs. Like, is there like a plan for?
That's a really good point. So accessibility, it ties into the affordability thing too we're talking about. And accessibility and fairness of opportunity. So my son, he plays hockey. I was a terrible hockey player. But my son's a pretty good one. And what's nice about Waterloo, one of the many things, is the leagues have done a good job of making sure that their fees aren't too high to allow people to get started. But what they've also done a good job of already is that they have a fund. What they haven't done is make sure that everyone knows about it, because it's buried on a website at further pages in, too many mouse clicks along the way. But they have a fund where you can apply to get support, financial support specifically, to pay for the activities that you're talking about. And what we can do as mayor, in our first 100 days, we're doing a full asset review. And this is a snapshot. They call it the general's view of what's going on. Very strategic. But you look at the assets, some of the liabilities, and the major resources within our city and within our community to assess what's missing, what's needed. And I'd like to take a really good look at this plan, because when things get tight, or should you just need a little bit of help, there should be something that our community can do absolutely in the areas of recreation, sports, and other types of programs. And the city's doing a good job of this. We're going to make sure that there's enough bandwidth there to help those in need. Absolutely.
Love that. Yeah, we'd love to see that. Yeah, because I'd hate for the next Jamal Murray to say, "Oh, can't afford this," so he doesn't. Yeah. So
That's a good one.
if you guys have something to add, questions.
I got a question. What were the sports that you like to play, Julius?
I played I played basketball, soccer, football. Literally, I played a little bit of hockey too, growing up, and then I stopped.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did play a lot of sports.
Yeah. Well, sports is such a great thing that brings people together too.
Yeah.
It's not just an activity to stay active
Yeah.
and have fun too, but like look at music, look at sports. There's ways that like you get people interacting together, and you know I was a terrible hockey player. I grew up. I played violin.
Really?
Not a lot of hockey players playing violin. But the point is, I play guitar now, and that's something that I like. But I met so many people along the way of finding my way to guitar as like my sweet spot, and it's different. But we're talking about opportunities. So the libraries. I don't know if you guys know this. The Kitchener Library has an amazing program. They will loan you instruments for free. You can check them out like books. And again, not everyone knows about that stuff. So that's just a good way of making sure whether you're the next Jamal Murray or one of the guys from Blue Rodeo lives in town, whatever it is you want to do, there should be an accessible way to do it, especially if it's something as positive as music or sports or arts. And there's ways of doing that, and especially as mayor, we can work with council to make some of this stuff happen.
That's great. Yeah.
I actually do have a question. So this question is more leading into on the hypothetical of if you do get into becoming the mayor. It's one of those things where I think a lot of people may or may not actually know this will be happening, but considering how cold it's getting now, and considering how I think a lot of people have been saying this will probably be one of the worst, one of the more worst or winters that is going to come to Canada in a long time. Do you think when you become mayor, if that happens, which I hope it does, what do you think? Do you think you will have that affordable, I think renting and like housing? Will that be more something that's going to be set up next year that is going to take some time to figure out? Or do you think you have a plan in place for something to where when it does get into the deep winter that you are prepared for that to happen? Because I know obviously I can't tell what the weather's going to be like in the next few months, but judging how cold it gets during the day, in the morning, and especially at night, I think that's one of the things that you got to think about, that I think about when it comes to what this weather's going to be this year.
So that's a very conscientious way of looking at it. There's folks who don't have a home, and a Canadian winter is impossible to be on the street like that. There's a million options that are better than keeping anybody on the street in Canada, and I know we can do better, and it's not for lack of caring. I need to put this out there too. The region as well as the city, there are a number of support agencies. There's at least 5. There's Lutherwood. There's Reception House for new folks arriving to Canada. There's organizations like Friendship House, where John Neufeld and his team, they have a food distribution program that's fantastic. There's 2 new shelters the region opened up for 150 new beds. There's one on Frederick Street, and there's one on Queen Street, the old men's shelter. There's a new one being built as well. So that's going to provide emergency shelter space for about 250 or so people. But then there's 750 others. And those are only people who are here today that we know of. There's also people who are struggling to pay for where they are currently living. So there are some real programs. Firstly and foremost, you're mentioning the folks in the greatest need, the crisis of the folks who are on the streets today. So there's some pretty compelling programs that can happen, and they're better than putting people in motels. Firstly, it's better for them. Apartments have a kitchen. You can make food there. So you and your family can at least, should that be, who has need, you can prepare your own food and feel more comfortable and be more self-reliant. And it's more economical. That's the missing part that not everybody knows about. Where if we only focus on policy and what rules are within the rules, there's sometimes there's too many rules. And sometimes people, they just need a safe place they can trust. So I'll take this one step further. I did an accommodation business. It was a global business. We had 200 people arriving in January. One room provider broke a contract and cast our business and 200 people onto the street in January. Wow. Now, we had a little bit of advance notice. So our staff, they worked really well and really hard to take care of these folks. But when you look at the purpose of sleeping at night someplace, and you look at it from a customer service standpoint, it's something they rely on every single day. It cannot be let down, and that's why agreements are there. So the point about this is when people have a place to sleep, there's a trust factor there. The key needs to open the door that you paid for, and the contract that we have, whether it's a lease or a rental agreement or something like that, there's ways that you need to honor those agreements. And when that honoring an agreement breaks down, or when there isn't a place to sleep and people stare at the rules too much, then you're missing the human element. And so, yes, there are ways that we can help take care of a lot of those folks. They're a little bit different, but it does involve taking more ownership of leases, taking more ownership of housing. When we build or buy a house, you can buy a place that's already there, it's going to be faster than if you wait 3 years to build a multi-purpose facility and to work with those great community support organizations that sometimes provide the additional supports that those folks also need. But there's ways to buy something that's already there and make it useful. There's also ways to make better use of existing space. So there's a church, St. Mary's downtown Kitchener. They provide meals for 700 people every 4 days. It's amazing. There's another church called All Saints in Waterloo. They're also providing about 400 meals a week for people, and they're building a new facility. They're making better use of existing space, folks. So when you don't have any place to sleep, or the place for one person is too expensive, well, if two people share it, it costs about half as much. Simple principle, but when we get caught up in the rules, or we stare at the rules too much, we lose sight of the human factor, right? Where people need a better option, and there are better options.
I like you saying that because it just I just feel like to highlight that only because of where the weather's coming in the next few months, and I think some people are not thinking about that right now. Like I think it was you were saying it that people just live in the present moment. We don't think about what's going to happen in our future and like what you have to prepare for in terms of not only just winter but with even one topic to talk about where I think it was like the Toronto mayor government or something. They said that the minimum wage is going up 50 cents, and although some people may think that's a good thing or it's exciting, the inflation is just going to make that make your sandwich that you want maybe like $1 more or something like that. I've already seen it. I've already seen it with an example, and I know it's like not too much to worry about, but a lot of people don't realize that when you for example go to McDonald's, right? You get a junior chicken. Like years ago, back when I was in high school, they used to be $1.49, and then now they're $3. So $2. So for 2 sandwiches, it's $6, and then you're like, and they're like, no, I thought it was like, yo, I used to get like that for like $3 for 2 of them. It's crazy. Sure. But like not even that. Like a sriracha bottle now is like $10 when they used to be like $4.50.
That's crazy.
And then it's like I know it's like such a small amount, but that just shows like how much an inflation is just going like skyrocketing, and it's just I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it's just crazy to think about right now.
You just hit on it. Cost of living is going up faster than wages, okay, and that's creating a gap. The gap is way too big, and it's growing fast. If we keep taking the same old-fashioned ways of trying to solve this, the gap will grow too big, and we won't catch up to it. And then it creates those who own stuff and those who don't. And that stratifies society, and it's bullshit. There's so many ways that we can catch up to this. So one is a living wage. We're talking about this. There's a lot of folks who work in poverty. They go to a job, they work all day, they go home, should they be fortunate enough to have one, and they still can't pay the bills. And it's a terrible feeling. And the ways to do this. So minimum wage is one thing. Something called basic income guarantee. So right now, when somebody's on employment insurance, should they be fortunate enough to qualify, there's rules. So when you're unemployed and need help for too long, they'll stop helping you.
Yep.
Even when you still need help. It's a bit of bullshit. Somebody wants to work and can't. Why should there be a limit on when we as a country or province or city limit our help to them? And then when you get help, you're fortunate enough to find a job, they'll take money back from you to pay back what they were doing to help.
Right.
Now, look, there's different ways of doing things. But we're talking about the working poor. We're about poverty. There's 1 in 8 Canadians, I believe is the statistic, are working below the poverty line right now, today. 1 in 8. So if you're in school and there's 30 people in your classroom, look around you. There's folks you don't know who are struggling. There might be folks you do know who are struggling. There's also those you don't know their background or know what's going on at home. And so the working wage. So there's a talent gap. We talked about this earlier too. Personal support workers. We need people in healthcare doing work, and there's folks who are qualified. But there's also a talent shortage where personal support workers, they fill a lot of gaps in healthcare, especially for older adults. And these folks don't have a living wage. They're often paid below $20 an hour. And you don't have to go far to realize how far $20 an hour works after you've gone to school or you have some credentials and you're working to care for people every day. Teachers, I'll talk about this and how it relates to other countries. In the States, teachers aren't respected at the same level they are here in Canada or Ontario. And it's weird. I didn't understand that. But back to the point that you were making of what you earn, the cost of living, and a sriracha bottle, $10. Things are going up in price. We need to make sure that our baseline level of income, if you have a full-time job, you should be able to pay for life.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between people who live paycheck to paycheck when I talk about people who make over 100K or people who are living so much like that. The next paycheck is the difference between having food or not having food. That's the line that people don't realize that's there. And it's kind of crazy when I think about it because some people will say, oh, I won't be able to get something until my next paycheck. Because I know for students it's one thing, but I think even people who are older than me like that, that are not even like that far in, like maybe that far in age or that then they're in their 30s or 40s, they even still have that thing going. And my mom's a personal support worker too, so I understand what you're talking about there as well.
So you hit on this. And so I've spent my life in technology, right, working for startups. And after, I don't know, a decade or so of helping millionaires earn a few more $1 million, I didn't have that great feeling at the end of the day. And what was really cool, I was working at the Accelerator Center. This is a business accelerator program. It helps do things faster and helps people learn how to build companies and build technology products and services. And John Neufeld of House of Friendship, he came and spoke to a room full of techies and founders and people who often are this close to their laptop for a long time writing code or working through challenges of building a business and creating something new where something didn't exist before. And the room full of people at the end, he says, okay, who wants to come with us to do some food basket deliveries? So I went. So did a few others. And it was a great experience. But what was really eye-opening was we went to neighborhoods that I never would have believed needed help. You look at these are big houses, but there's different families living in these houses. There's different types of people there who have the same needs that I do for food. And it showed me something that there's folks who we walk past every day, we work with, we interact with in some way. We might see, on the streets or playing soccer or whatever it is with them. There's folks we don't know who will be struggling with things we're not yet aware of. And a little bit of compassion and a little bit of understanding goes a long way. And so what John showed me just was that even in our own community, there's not only ways that we can help, of course, but there's also people who struggle that we weren't really fully aware of. And it takes organizations like that to recognize we don't need to support only one type of person or one family size of this or people of a certain color or whatever church people go to or not at all.
Even a certain area of where people live too. That's also a thing too. Yeah.
Different neighborhoods. Good point. Theo.
I love that, man.
Bridging the gap, that's what really matters. Bridging the gap. Waterloo is a place that's touted as one of the fastest growing innovative regions in the world. And as long as you have some real practical steps, real proactive steps towards equity, we're great. Like currently, the world is extremely reactive towards issues of discrimination. Something has to happen before people get upset. Like the same old, pardon my language, but the same old gals who walk up in Black Lives Matter, parade downtown Kitchener holding things are the same people who clutch your purse a little tighter when I walk next to them in the supermarket. No cap. So just I'm interested in seeing just how this gap is going to be closed, because in order to have a thriving local economy, we need to have a talent pool with built capacity. We need to have young people who have hope that they could be tomorrow. I had an incident. Thanksgiving 2019. I was doing a little stint for Uber Eats. I skipped the dishes, and somebody tried to rob me. It was a cash order, and this guy comes out. He's like, black boy, pulls a Glock on me. He's like, yeah, give me your money. I said, look, what are you doing? What you're doing? It didn't make sense to me, And he backed off. He went off down the road. I know, like, the Lord dealt with him and all that. But this is a young man who was so hopeless, he decided to go out with a gun to try and jack another man who's doing a side gig. How hopeless do you have to be to get to this stage? How can we then stem this hopelessness from the bottom? So closing the gap it's a very expansive thing. It's a multi-layered problem, and I'm just happy that you're committing. You've committed on this podcast to doing things in office to close the gap, doing things in office to make openings more accessible, and that's what we really need now. It's not so much about the city looking good internationally because there are 15 unicorns in a 25-mile radius. No, it's about how many young kids get up and have hope. They get up and they actually make things. They get up and they have self-belief. Because the harsh truth is, in most minority-centric communities, you have a breakdown of the family structure. That's a thing. And the basic fundamental unit of humanity is a family. People learn finances from family. People get their first seed funding from family. But when you look at an area that is systemically crippled in this regard, there is a breakdown of the family structure. How well can extraneous socializing organizations like the city, help this? How well can community mobilization fill in the gaps and make men and women who can lead? Yeah, that's what's on my heart.
And it's interesting too, because there's two things I want to go off from that. For the first thing he was talking about when someone tried to rob him is that I remember hearing a story. This one person was this one kid. He had a friend who was one of those dads that had a lot of money, and then he asked his friend's dad, like, I heard that money is the root of all evil, so why do you have all this money? And then the son says, no, the money is not the root of all evil. The lack of money is the root of all evil, because the worst thing a man can do that he doesn't have is just a man that is willing to lose everything because he has nothing. That kind of mindset of that. Not people don't do things. People who have money are not evil. It's just the people that don't have it, doesn't have anything to go off of. So what is it they have to lose? So that's what they can do, anything and everything to get a meal at night. Kind of what he was going back to, how he was saying, what point do you go to do things like that? And And another thing too, when he's talking about how the family structure, on how finance and everything is like that, and also I believe, in my opinion, it's the same thing when it comes to people who do not like people of color, because think about when you were born as a baby, when you seen another baby, no matter what color of their skin was, you didn't think, oh, because his skin color is different, I don't like this person. It's more from an environmental, like parents raising up their kids to become that, because they have that sort of mindset of, oh, I had an experience with someone who was of color, and now I'm going to teach to you why that person is not someone you should talk to, or why you should discriminate against them. It's not something that is born. It's something that is taught by our families. That's what I view it.
I agree entirely. It's a learned thing. People are not born with hate in their hearts. People learn it. When they learn it, sometimes it's on purpose. Sometimes it's by accident, or it's been socialized, or it's been culturized, depending on whatever community you're in, and it transcends beyond skin color too. Let's talk about this. Kitchener. So after World War I, they changed their name. They have a heritage of German folks who helped settle the city.
When we were talking about that, Kitchener used to be called Berlin. Yeah.
And they changed their name, but some of the level of thinking didn't change.
Right.
And there's people who didn't like German folks. And, well, my family, we were talking about this earlier. My great-grandmother, she was from a German part of France. And at one point in history, it was France, and in a different part, in a very close history, it was part of Germany. She was a lovely lady. And when you try to draw lines in history, like we're all immigrants, we all arrived here in different shapes and forms and points in time. But when we get too caught up in drawing a hard line, problems happen. And so I feel like to hatred, it's not something that has any place in this world. And there's the simple thing about the golden rule they talk about, right? Like, treat your neighbor the way you'd like to be treated. I'm not perfect. I've never been. I probably won't ever be. But I'm going to try. I'm going to try to set a good example. And a key part in my life was when I had my son. I think I became a better person because I started thinking just beyond myself. I need this for me. I want this house for me and my family and these things here, but now I have a son. I have a child who relies on me for everything. And that perspective is something you don't need to have a kid to have. But it helped me out. Just think a little bit beyond here. So one of the earlier questions is, what do I want to do as mayor? It's like, make the city a little better for my son's generation. Of course, we'll make some changes on the roads, and we'll deal with the speed limit thing and other things that need to get done and managed. But it's that bigger picture. It's the vision of what we want. The vision, I'm so disappointed that happened to you or to anybody. But it's the desperation. It's fear. It's people who are at the end of the rope. And with too many barriers, when you need help, if you go looking for it, you don't get it. What is it that you're going to do? So that person might have been at the end of their rope, and they didn't know what else to do. And I think as a community, whether it's your neighbor, somebody you live near or work with or go to church with or go to school with, a little bit of kindness can go a long way.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. You wanna end off the question or something?
How much time we got? Theo, man, this is you.
I'm glad we had this very candid discussion about what matters. You reiterated that a lot of the people you met over the past 6 weeks are focusing on the minutia, and maybe just because they don't see a bigger perspective. maybe it would benefit those people to listen to people of diverse lived experiences, so they can realize that what being bucked about 30 versus 40 kilometers has absolutely nothing on, kids growing up and trying to turn to crime out of desperation. You know, so well, thank you, Bob, and I hope you do become a. And when you do, you got to remember this conversation because we will hold you up to it.
Yeah, we're gonna. We have it on
Trust.
tape. Everything is on tape.
Yeah. Well, you're right. We're talking about e-transfer here, discussion. When people don't talk about the tough things, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
So as a starting point, to do exactly what you guys are doing here, I don't have a perfect answer, but I know talking about it is a good first step always.
And we always like learning from each other, so it's really important that we have this convo. Like he's from another country, we're all from different
Backgrounds.
Yeah, so it's just good to have this space, to have an area that we can always come to and just talk and have a discussion. So yeah, I really appreciate you for coming out. And any last thought here before we close out? Is there anything you want to say to the viewers, or like what you want to do before we close out?
Well, to start, I'd like to thank you guys for the opportunity to engage like this. And I'd like to thank my son for introducing us.
Yeah. How we met was crazy.
So it's great. And of course, there's an election coming up. And this was something we talked about earlier today. It's an opportunity to close that gap in what people need and the way we approach it. So Rob Evans, mayor.ca is the website. You can go to learn a little bit more about us.
Last day to vote is October 24th, you said?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so guys, make sure to vote. If you're a Canadian citizen, guys, don't be afraid to vote. Go there and vote, guys. Rob Evans, okay, guys? Yeah. Also, a big shout out to your wife over there. I know she's supporting you behind the scenes, so yeah.
Thank you so much.
We're happy to have you. Thank you.
Yeah, we're so
Thank you.
happy to have you on this. And yeah, guys, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Close out. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
No, really, thank you. It was great talking to you. Like,
That was a good chat.
I hope we can have some more conversations.